Agwini Ushla, Tafolcharovga Celtic Junction Art Centre is Misha Natalie Nugent O'Shea is Stjórnarme Inid Cultura on show. My name is Natalie Nugent O'Shea. I am the Executive Director of the Celtic Junction Art Centre, and we would love to welcome you to our seminar series. So we're coming to you from the Celtic Junction itself. We're based in St. Paul, Minnesota, although because it's the Twin Cities, we're literally straddling the two cities, very, very close to the border here. And we love to welcome dynamic speakers and things that tie in with our programs. So part of what we do here at the Celtic Junction, we have 4 dynamic programs. We've been doing concerts for about 14 years. We've been doing our library. Now we're going on our 7th year educational program for 6 years. And of course, our outreach, which we've been doing, I suppose, really since before the center was established. And with those programs, we really get excited about finding dynamic speakers that serve the people that are involved with programs, and then actually a broader kind of national audience. We are a part of the Midwest group of Irish cultural centers, which includes 5 others around in a 600-mile radius. I know it's big, but there's not many of us. We're kind of an archipelago, like little islands in a sea of Irish culture in the Midwest prairies here. We're also part of the National Association of Irish Cultural Centers, which has been really taking off and very dynamic. We have partnerships abroad with different organizations in Ireland. And this is the first time we've actually done a seminar with Oideas Gael. We are tying this with our education program. We have a very dynamic Irish language department. And what I'd like to do now is introduce the founder of our education program and one of the Irish language teachers here. And also, he's probably going to talk about our special intensive weekend. The Gaeltacht na Gaeilge is coming up, and this is Mr. Patrick O'Donnell.
Guramahagut Natalie, so she shin Ghaeltacht, so the quid Gaeilge arouse, and he has shot, so Mahu, I thought she harbar, but me soltas. So it's Misha Patrick O'Donnell, Stro Horatakis, on culture on Shaw, Celtic Junction. So I'm Patrick O'Donnell, the Director of Education. So as Natalie said, for 6 years we have been growing in the Irish language program. We were working with the TEG with Maynooth, and now we have moved into an international partnership with Gaelin, which has been a great success. So I'm delighted to welcome Rónán here. Rónán is the language director from Oideas Gael in the absolutely beautiful, stunning Glencolumkill, which I had the delight to attend last August. For a week, did one of their adult education Irish language immersion weeks. And Rónán is going to speak to us about Irish film. I just would like to mention, though, we have our own Gaeltacht na Gaeilge coming up, April 21st to 23rd. We have 5 teachers coming to us. We have Raymond O'Kieran coming from Gaelin. We have Dean Farrell coming down from Montreal. And then we have 3 teachers here, including myself, Maureen Engelhart and Lavinia Finnerty. So we will have 5 levels, which is our biggest and most comprehensive presentation. So with no further ado, all I would ask you to do is please keep an eye on the Q&A as Rónán is presenting. Please put in questions. At the end of the talk, we'll have Rónán respond. Okay. So I'll turn it over to you, Rónán. Welcome to Celtic Junction, and thank you very much for being one of our international speakers. Go ahead.
Gur míle mai go fáidir agus Natalie, yeah, curú fáilte ítach Rómán seo agus tá mé milsena buíochtaíh. I've gotten this is my first time visiting the Twin Cities, and I've gotten just a fantastic welcome from everyone here at Celtic Junction, and it was lovely to meet the team. And Mollum Gomorshив ta upper Intach Urshul and Shaw. You were talking, Natalie was talking about the Irish centres around America, and anytime I visit any of those centres, I'm always struck by just the amount of time and commitment that people put into it, and it's very inspiring for the likes of ourselves. So I just want to say gur míle míle maithigh, and maybe we'll get to talk about some of those kind of things again at the end. Tá cúpla sleamh agam. I have a few slides. They're mostly pictures, so I'm going to have to talk a lot, but not for too long, hopefully. So tá I need a wrench. I'm going to share them now, and hopefully that comes up okay. Are we looking good? And why? So yeah, so on Tedula Hug Majoran Cancha, I call this Un Gaeltacht go Hollywood, from the Gaeltacht to Hollywood, the Irish language, so Walia agus again, home and away. And the idea was to do a little tour around the language in its sort of modern setting and how it's being used today. And obviously the idea of Hollywood was in there, and I was thinking about this film on Colleen Kewen, but could not have predicted when we set all this up a while back just kind of how timely it would be. If you opened up the New York Times on Friday, you got no less than 2 articles about the Irish language, very much inspired by this film. So this on Colleen Kewen, released here as The Quiet Girl, a subtitled film. At the very end of the slides, I have part of the list of all of the cinemas in the US that it is or will be available to watch in. So it's out there, and I hope people will get to see it. It's in Ireland certainly, but I get the feeling internationally it's created a bit of buzz about the language. It's drawn some attention to the language, mainly of course, because it's gotten this Oscar nomination for Best International Film, which is the first time that has happened for an Irish language feature-length film. But even besides that, the film is remarkable in a couple of different ways. First of all, it's an excellent film. It's a fantastic film, and all the accolades are well deserved. It is now the highest grossing Irish language film of all time. You could say the most successful Irish language film of all time. And it's gotten rave reviews from places like The Guardian in the UK, to the New York Times, to Rolling Stone, to there's a great article there in The Weekend in the LA Times. So so it's attracted a bit of attention. We were very lucky last year, and it was a pleasure to meet Patrick, as he mentioned there, in Oideas Gael last summer. We got to screen it twice last summer as part of our courses in July and August, and for one of our screenings we had some of the people involved in making the film there. So you see here Dervin Curran, who is one of the executive producers on the films, and Carrie Crowley, who's been a long-time friend of Oideas Gael, and she, of course, is one of the central cast in the film. She plays the aunt, Eileen, and Liam O'Connor, our founder. So I seen it for the first time properly at one of those events, and I kind of knew this is going places, and it sure proved that way. But literally last week, I had 2 different journalists in Ireland ask me the exact same phrase. They said, "Is Irish having a moment?" So I Googled it to see where were they getting this from. And obviously this is the phrase that is being used. But maybe part of what I'm going to say here is that, tá níos móna bumaite I gceist. There's more than just a minute to this, and it's kind of a result of a lot of things that happened along the way to get there. And I'm not an expert on cinema, I'm going to say that now. I'll be talking a little bit about the Gaeltacht and the Irish language and the work Oideas Gael does. But what I think is interesting about Colleen Kewen is it kind of shows a pattern or a dynamic about how these sort of projects that have a language element, how they can be successful. And I think there's some kind of traits in common to it and a few other things. So that's kind of what I want to talk about here. But tus no image Sawalia, we'll start at home, and Irish language in Ireland. I'm assuming if people are here, they have a reasonable grasp of what the Irish language is and a little bit of its background and where it's spoken and things like this. But I wanted to just look at Irish today and the kind of contemporary situation and what's relevant when we're talking about these things. And again, I know people will be aware of this, but I think it bears stating always. So one of the things that's very interesting, to put it politely, or very different about the Irish language, of course, is that it's a language in its home country that exists in 2 different political jurisdictions. So you have the North and the South, Northern Ireland and Ireland, or the Republic of Ireland. And And so the sort of experience people have had over the language over the last 100 years has played out very differently in those two places, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But just some statistics, and we won't do too many statistics, I promise you. But if you go by the last census, now the last census that we have full data for was in 2016. There has one has been carried out since. It got a bit delayed because of COVID, and the full data hasn't been published yet. So that is why I'm going back to 2016 here. But about Ireland is a country of about 5 million people. About 1.7 people on their census returns are claiming some ability in Irish, so they can speak Irish to some degree or other. Which is not surprising, because as most of you would be aware, most people in Ireland, in the south at least, do it as part of their education. They study the language at primary and secondary level, or right till they finish high school, essentially. And so you would assume that there would be kind of a baseline level of the language. But maybe a more, in terms of the long-term sort of sustainability of the language, maybe a more interesting figure to look at is how many speak it daily outside of the education system. So they're using it in their everyday life, and literally every day, you're talking on a daily basis. And so in the Republic of Ireland, you're talking at just shy of about 74,000, which was what came up on the last census return. So very much a minority language in Ireland, but at the same time, a relatively healthy figure. Now, obviously, in Northern Ireland, it's had a different history. There hasn't been the history of state support for the language. In fact, they've had to deal with maybe a lot of roadblocks along the way. Despite this, today, over 12% indicate some ability in the language, okay? And you can go into a little bit more detail about that. But what I think is very interesting about that figure is that figure has been increasing. So if you go back to the sort of equivalent statistics in the early 1990s, it was 8-9%. So it's slow but steady increase. And there's about 6,000. There isn't the two censuses on both sides of the border don't work exactly the same. What the closest thing I could find for recording what the daily speakers are, there's a question on the NI census about what's your main language. So I suppose what language are you living large parts of your lives through? And about 6,000 people in the most recent census, which we do have data for, which is 2021, about 6,000 people said it was their main language. So that's interesting. On the island as a whole, I would say, suppose more so south, it's kind of universal in the south, but for a large part in the north, you have positive attitudes towards the language. And that's one thing that really the language has in its favor. Tadini jarfach fan Gaeilge, because being jarku jarfach fan Gaeilge. The challenge, though, is that while people feel positively about it generally, it's not like being dropped in a foreign country where you don't speak the language and you have to learn it. People can live their lives through English in Ireland. So there's not the same need, the same requirement to have to learn the language, which is obviously something that presents a bit of a challenge. Now, Irish people are very happy that we all speak English. It's made us a very global country, and I don't think anyone would look to change that. But just as a sort of a practical issue from in terms of speaking and spreading the language, that's something that comes into effect. So in the south, since the foundation of the Irish state, we've been very lucky, and we were talking about languages like Ojibwe and that earlier. And before people came in, we were talking about some of the other minority languages in Europe. Like, I feel we are very lucky. If you compare what we have to what a lot of other languages have, we're in a very good position. So obviously the language has an element of constitutional protection. It is the first official language of the state. We have had various pieces of legislation, particularly the Official Languages Act, which is one of the more recent ones that was recently applied, that sort of gives more protections and guarantees in terms of the language. Now, the implementation of that has not always been 100%. And sometimes you go to look for the services and they're not there. But the most recent revision of that bill has actually strengthened that a lot. And part of that is we have a language commissioner, which was a model they had in Wales prior to that, and I think they looked at it. So there is sort of an ombudsman or a person you can go with if you feel the state is sort of falling down in its provision of services for Irish language speakers. There's someone to go there. We have a government department, or at least part of a government department, a Minister of State, which is sort of a junior minister in the Irish government, specifically tasked with the Irish language and the Gaeltacht, the Irish-speaking areas. You have bodies like Oideas Gaeltacht, which is the Gaeltacht Development Authority, very much to do with language planning and economic development. Now, very similar to, we have the IDA and Enterprise Ireland doing that in other parts of Ireland. So it's not that, in a way, it's not that different, but they pay particular attention to the needs of the language and what the impact economic development has on the language. There's cross-border agencies as well, like Oideas Gael, and a lot of that has supported developments in media, radio, television, news, and things like filmmaking that we'll come back onto in a little while again. And the big recent development, I think, in terms of Irish, is that it is in last year, officially at the January 1st, 2022, it became a full official language of the European Union, which in terms of was a real gives a real status to the language. And when it's something, when I mentioned to other people in Europe, they're they're very interested to find out about that. Of course, in Northern Ireland, slightly different situation. There has been and probably to put it charitably, there's been a lack of state support until relatively recently, probably a degree of hostility in certain quarters. But since the Good Friday Agreement, that has improved. Though a lot of the things I think that have been achieved in Northern Ireland, people would say themselves who were involved in it, it has been community driven. It has been sort of activist based. So what they have achieved in terms of Irish medium education, in terms of setting up, say, like Gaeltacht areas in Belfast, has come from the ground up. Maybe at a later point, the state stepped in and offered some support, not always. But there have been, again, more and more over time, some state-sponsored interventions, a thing like the Gaeltacht, which is the broadcasting fund. It provides, seeing as we're talking about films and media here, it has offered some support, things like the LEFA scheme to help learners of Irish, things like that. There has been an ongoing political bone of contention about having an Irish language bill. The interesting thing, of course, in the north of Ireland as well, is that for a long time now, London has not been particularly opposed to the language or providing recognition to the language, because it has happened in the other territories of the United Kingdom. Wales for a long time has had enjoyed a relatively good protection of the Welsh language, and in Scotland to some degree as well. But it tends to be more internal political conflicts that has stood in the way maybe of making some headway legislation-wise in Northern Ireland. But it's getting there. And last year there was the Irish Language and Identity Bill was passed, was signed by King Charles. If you can imagine, think about the what that means in terms of history, and it is being implemented and will provide some extra support in terms of how people can deal with the state in terms of the Irish language as well there. And then back to the Gaeltacht. So again, I'm assuming some people know a little bit about the Gaeltacht. We're talking about areas where Irish is one of the main, one of the main community languages. And in what makes up Gaeltacht areas, obviously a lot of them tend to be westernly. I was talking to some people earlier about Rathcarn, which is obviously a big exception to that, in County Meath, and also down at the south of the country you have on Rhine, as they say, in Portlartiga in Waterford. And so according to the statistics, again, you're talking about 21,000, this is back in 2016, people who, live their life through the Irish language in the Gaeltacht. And we're going to talk a little bit about there. But the Gaeltachts are important, and I'm going to talk a bit about my own area, Glanchollum in a minute. I think they are particularly important in that they are that unbroken link with the heritage. The language has been spoken there certainly for, we know for maybe, a millennium and a half, as in, we can prove that, but almost certainly longer. We just don't have anything written down to say that. But so it's, there's a continuity there. And while it's very important, and I'm going to stress this a lot about being inclusive and bringing new people into the language and learners in urban and international contexts, often in Irish people talk about the Gaeltacht, they use the word tubber, well, that it's a well people can go back to, that because there has been this heritage handed down from generation to generation. So I'm going to speak a little bit about where we're based, Oideas Gael, where I work, and what we do and where we're based. Oideas Gael was founded almost 40 years ago. We'll be 40 years of age next year, And it's an Irish language cultural centre in Donegal in the northwest of Ireland. We do Irish language courses. Adults come to learn the Irish language at all levels, from complete beginners to really Dinata Fear Lifa. At all levels. And also they can learn the language in other ways. We do what we call them cultural activity holidays. So maybe people might be intimidated by the classroom setting. This is very true of Irish people in particular, I find. Or they would just like to learn the language in a different way. So you can come to us and you can do hill walking, or you can take a course to do with the environment, or you can take a course to do with weaving or music or something like that. And the thing we always make sure of is that our instructors are Irish speakers, and so they can the courses work bilingually. If you want to do all of your business in the class in Irish, you can. If you just want to practice a little, you can as well. And so it's a different tone, a different environment, a very kind of safe way for people to learn. That's obviously the people coming to visit us. And I'll go talk a little bit more about the areas themselves. But we work in 3 Gaeltacht areas. We're based, our centre is in Ghaeltacht, which is in southwest County Donegal. You can see on the map there. So we're there year round. We're open year round. We're doing courses and activities and involved in projects. We do also at various times of the year work in other Gaeltacht areas. So in Ghlaninne, right in the middle, in an area called An Gaeltacht Lar, literally the middle Gaeltacht, in the middle of Donegal, right beside the Bluestack Mountains. Beautiful part of the world, and has a beautiful dialect of Irish. And yeah, we're very happy to be there. And also on Tory Island, 9 miles off the coast of County Donegal, and really, one of the strongest Irish-speaking regions of the country. And that's part of the reason we like to go there, and we'll come back to that. We're spoiled, tá muid milse, between the kind of landscape we have. This is Cionnacharigeen, this is right beside Slieve League. The archaeology, and I always tell people to come. People have been living there for a long time. That's a portal tomb, a dolmen, built sometime around 3,000 to 3,500 BC. So there are lots of these around the area, and that's an area that people study sometimes when they come here. But we're spoiled in terms of the culture and the heritage and the environment and music and things like that, and we try to give that to people when they come, and share it with them when they come to visit us. But going back to the speaking of the language, and so there was a very important sort of study done in 2007 with a really snappy title, a comprehensive linguistic study of Irish in the Gaeltacht, and Studier Cumshiach Changoliac or Úsáid na Gaeilge sa Gaeltacht. It's equally as snappy in the 2 languages, and it does many things, and research into many areas of the experience of the Gaeltachts. But one of the things it does, it categorizes Gaeltachts into 3 types of regions, so A, B, and C, and you can see the sort of definitions there. But essentially, A going from the strongest to the weakest as such. So A would be, and for example, I mentioned Tory Island there, Tory. So our, Tory would be very much in the A category, and where literally almost everyone on the island is an Irish speaker and would use it in their day-to-day lives. And it's just a pleasure to be there if you're interested in the language. And where Ghaeltacht is, and we make no secret of this fact, we are a category C Gaeltacht. And what they say there is that there is a lot of English, but there is the Irish-speaking minority is much higher than the national average of Irish-speaking, and that it's again that unbroken connection still exists. There is still that network of speakers of the language, but it's under threat, and that's part of the reason why Oideas Gael exists. And I mean, just to highlight that, going back to the census data, and they don't make it too easy to present this data, but one of the ways we divide up the country in Ireland is by electoral division. These are the 3 electoral divisions that basically make up the area I'm talking about when I talk about Ghaeltacht, even though there's a little subdivision there with the same name. And what you see in the change from 2011 to 2016 is a slight drop in the number of the daily speakers of the language. Now, some factors have to be taken in there. The economic crash happened right before this, and you had a lot of emigration, you had a lot of people moving, areas like that, out of the area, and that would have had an impact on things too. I hope when we get the next census, you're going to see it go the other way, and we should know about that quite soon. Interestingly, in that same time, there is another sort of way they look at it in the census data. They talk about weekly speakers. So, okay, your family life, your home life, your work may not be entirely lived through the language, but maybe, you use it in certain areas of your life. And they had actually overall increased. And these figures are in addition to the daily speakers. Okay, it's a small area. It's about 700 people living in it normally. When Oideas Gael courses are in full flight in July and August, we increase the population of the area a significant amount. So what you're seeing there, the worry there is that you're seeing that positive attitude. You're seeing more and more people willing to lose the language. But what we worry about is the transition, that transmitting the language from one generation to the next. Oideas Gael was kind of set up to do two things. You can see all our aims there, but really there's a dual thing going on. One, we want to help people learn the language. We want people who come to us to help learn it and enjoy learning it. That's very important, and especially help them speak it. But also, I always tell people when they come to us that they're helping us as well, because Oideas Gael is we're not a charity. We're a business. We work on, I suppose you should call a social enterprise model. We're a business. We do our best to succeed as a business, but it's connected to trying doing something good for the community. And tourism sometimes can be looked on as something that can be bad or detrimental to minority languages, because you can have an influx of people who don't have the language into the area. But we've kind of tried to turn the tables around on that a wee bit. And people are coming to us to learn the language. And what kind of incentives does that create for people in the area to use the language then? Okay, because the people who come to us, they want to use Irish in the restaurants, in the pubs, in the shops, and their interactions with people. And what effect does that have on the local people? And as I mentioned, we're almost 40 years old. Liam O'Cunningham and Joseph Watsons were the two founders. Liam was from the area, spent a long time teaching adults with Gaelin in Dublin, actually, and that's a little connection here with Celtic Junction. Saw the sort of the types of people and the challenges they had and wanted to help them. That Joseph Watson was from what at the time would not be a traditional Irish-speaking background. He was from a Protestant Belfast family that wouldn't have sort of identified. That community at the time would have not widely identified with the use with the Irish language. That's improved an awful lot since, and Joseph was really forward thinking in that regard, because we always made the point in Oideas Gael that the language predates religious or political divisions. It was around long before that. And in Ireland and Scotland, people spoke the same language till relatively recently. You had Scots Gaelic. And again, that spanned all the divides. So from the beginning, it was a very inclusive thing. And from the beginning, we had people from all ends of the spectrum, again, political, religious, and also where in the world they came from too. It started small with just 1 week. It grew sort of organically until in 1991 we built our centre in Ghaeltacht, and from there on it really expanded. And we are, again, for an area with a population of about 700, we would, last year I think we had almost 1,700 people come visit us, and again most of those people would have stayed for a week or more. And I think in total, we are looking at something like 11,000 nights that people spent in Ghaeltacht. So it's in a small area, it has a big impact in all sorts of ways on the language side and the economic side, and how it, and we've had, in all sorts of ways. We've had lots of marriages, for example, that have come out of people visiting Oideas Gael. So it has all these sort of ramifications. I talked a little bit about what we do. We have a sort of a broad spectrum of courses, language classes, translation, editing, and then all of the cultural courses as well. And I mentioned so what was really interesting for me as a young person, I started working in Oideas Gael when I was 14, 15 years of age, and to see that almost half of the people that were attending the course were coming from all over the world. And a lot of people from North America, a lot of people from the UK, but also Japan, Australia, South America, everywhere. And the mix of people you see in a classroom, you could have, I said this to someone earlier today, you could have the Belgian ambassador and a postman from County Cavan and a US college student and God knows who else all sitting together in the classroom. And it's a great atmosphere, a great kind of dynamic to all of that. And yeah, as I say, it's a two-way street. So for people coming to us, they get to use the language in the context, in the Gaeltacht context. It's connected to the culture, so the heritage, the folklore, the storytelling, the music, all of that. And they're taking part in the life of the Gaeltacht. And it has an economic benefit, but it also, we hope, and I think it does, for the people living in the area, they see the value that other people place on the language, and it helps people kind of reevaluate what the value they place on the language themselves. And yeah, we're a small business. There's 3 of us there full time, though we have actually there's over 40 there. I think we had over 60 teachers working with us last year, particularly now because like a lot of other people were online as well. And yeah, it was important for Liam, I think, in founding Oideas Gael. It's, as I say, it's no accident that we're working as a business. The idea was Irish for so long had been associated with the West and poverty and people having to leave for the famine and, needing English to do abroad. So to connect the language with actually positive economic activity and, and to, again, show that people are interested in and place a value on that culture. It's not all about placing a value on it, but it's interesting to see how people are willing to come and take part in that. And more and more, it's always been like this, but more and more we're seeing the benefit as kind of a sustainable tourism. So people come, some of them travel a long way for sure, but they often come for weeks. They leave the car to one side and they spend time and get to become part of the community. And it's as tourism goes, it's quite even environmentally quite a sustainable thing. So I'm kind of going to be dodging over and back now between our experience and trying to take some lessons from talking about on Colin, because I think there's some things that in language initiatives that to me stick out as being the kind of the markers of things that do well. And the thing is that nobody likes being told what to do. And over its history, the Irish state has had a lot of top-down initiatives. Famously, I mean, at the start in 1922, the aim was to create an Irish-speaking state. Yeah, that is why it is the first official language of the Constitution. And I'm being really unfair to all of the people that are involved now for the sake of brevity. The idea very much was, well, we're going to teach it in the schools and the kids are going to learn it and they're going to grow up speaking the language. And, in a generation or two, it's going to be an Irish speaking country. And that was a little bit naive. And as I say, top-down approaches on their own don't tend to work that well. But what you see in things like this, and I say, talking about our own case in Oideas Gael, it started with local people and people who are familiar with the area, seeing a need, seeing a way they could help their own community, and other people. And but also doing that in the context of a state policy that was favorable, and we did, over the year in various kinds of ways, the Irish government, the Irish state has been helpful to us, has helped promote us, and it's worked well. The other thing that is that it takes time, and we're going to see that now talking about Irish language film. You can't expect results in a year or two, and Oideas Gael has been a 40-year project, and there's still an awful lot more we'd like to do. But it's about valuing your heritage and being confident enough to say that what we have here is something special and unique, and Sheila gur few Gomore. We think that it's really worthwhile. And connecting that then with, something that is of good quality. And the thing, like where on Colin, what it really exemplifies that for me is, it's a really good film and it's an Irish, it's not a film you go to see because it's an Irish. It's a really good film, and it's great that it's in the Irish language. And I think, the more and more things like that you get, the better. So taking a step back to where we started, a very, 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 very brief history of Irish language cinema. The first, I believe, or one of the first major bit of cinema in the Irish language, this film, Oideas Hanachish. A lot of you might know that as O-I for the C-H-E, Ihe. You have the older spelling there, which was sort of an offshoot of the Man of Iron production by Robert Flaherty. But when they were doing, I think when they were doing the sound stage recordings, they did this film, which was involved a lot of storytelling and sean-nós singing. But that is one of the first major pieces of Irish language cinema. The next two, Misha Era and Saoirse, which were really groundbreaking films done by Gael Lynn. And if I'm not wrong, I think Saoirse is going to be shown here in St. Paul at some stage before too long, were documentary films, cinema films made by an excellent filmmaker called George Morrison, and were really landmark productions. But what you're seeing here, you're seeing a lot of gaps, and I'm not going to claim that there wasn't any other film made in Irish, but these are the sort of the really significant films, I think. And you're seeing a gap there into 1978 to Pochín, which is probably the first major feature-length drama made for cinema in Ireland. And it was actually shown on television then on St. Patrick's Day 1979, and caused absolute consternation and mayhem, and people were not very happy for it, because it's sort of like I sort of think it's sort of like one of those sort of Sergio Leone kind of anti-Western kind of things, because it's set in Connemara, it's set in all of the like really traditional idyllic Gaeltacht settings, but it's quite a brutal film, and it's yeah, they're all anti-heroes, might be again a charitable way to describe them, and then you see a big gap, and obviously making feature-length films, I don't know what the answer to this is, but I imagine, a large part of it's economic. It's not cheap to make feature-length films. And there were a lot of other things that happened in this time. A Radio na Gaeltacht was established, the Irish language radio station TG Cahir in the 90s, the television station was established. I imagine a lot of effort was going into a lot of other things, but you see in the 2000s, we had this sort of upspring of Garscanan, of short films, and then some feature-length films coming along. Kings, which was a very interesting bilingual film, and Craignaquilla, the Irish novel made into a film, and then a film by Chosu O'Haney, the O'Haney, the sean-nós singer, Song of Granite, in 2017. So again, I'm showing that also none of this happens in a vacuum, and there's a history and there's a background to all of this, and people had to try things, and a lot of those are great films. Some of them are experimental, some of them are people, trying things out. And to get to the point where you're getting films into the Oscars, you don't start there. It takes a lot of steps to get along the way. But the real sort of game changer here came with when TG Cahir, the Irish language television station, sort of partnered with some of the other important film bodies in Ireland, and came up with the scheme Cine Cahir, from which we've had 5 or 6 films to date that have been released. So films like Aracht, Finky, Foscu, and then Colleen Kuhn is one of them as well. And actually the picture at the bottom there I snapped on Aer Lingus flight EI 125 to O'Hare yesterday. Rocha and Frank is the most recently released film, and it is it's on the in-flight entertainment there. So I presume it either is or it has a pending US release as well. So so that was nice to see, and it's a nice light-hearted film, quite funny. So it's a good one to see. But again, so this has been the big game changer in the set. And again, going back to the Northern Ireland context, there has been more support, particularly through that broadcasting fund, the Ciste Gaeltacht, and Dinian was another output of this that came around in 2021 as well. So you have this sort of recent outpouring. So that's the very dry, funding models, all of this, but it's important to think of the people as well, I think. And Colin Barrade, the director of An Colleen Kuhn, he didn't come out of a vacuum either. And his father was very active in the movement for Irish medium education in Ireland, the Gael Scoilne, schools where all subjects, bar English, I guess, are taught through the medium of Irish. And so his father was heavily involved in that. He himself was a product of that. And there's a great picture. I took this, I credited it, but I took this from the LA Times. They had a great article at the weekend, and this is a fantastic picture. Colin buried at age 15, standing beside Brendan Gleeson, and 1997. And Brendan Gleeson, in fact, starred in one of those short films I mentioned earlier. In fact, if I skip back here, he's on the picture on the top right, and there's Cillian Murphy on the picture on the top left. They were two short films produced around 2000, 2001, 2003. So a lot of now very well-known Irish actors had their... it's no surprise that some of them have been speaking Irish on the red carpet recently, I'll put it like that. But again, you know, and he was involved in a lot of Irish language television and about 10 films or TV series before this. So, you know, there's been a lot of repeated effort, and there's been that bottom up, ground up, people, you know, people plugging away, and eventually the stars align, and the, you know, the finances there, and the opportunities are there, and things happen. And I think that's very important as well. He had a great line in the interview he gave in that article. I loved it. For any language to survive, it has to be culturally present. And, you know, that's part of what he sees with these films like in Colleen Kuhn. You know, it's making it there and visible in the culture. And I think all of the coverage we've seen has kind of, you know, gone to say kind of testament to that. I'm just very quickly, I have one slide each, picking out a couple of other areas where I think you can see patterns like this. So this idea of investing time in something, of having this bottom-up community-driven effort, and then eventually meeting a sort of a favourable kind of language context and state policy and all that. And so the Gael Scolanna, the Irish medium education, is another great example. So many of them started off with groups of parents, initially in urban areas, particularly in Dublin, and then in Northern Ireland, in Belfast and Derry and places like that. With those groups of people just doing their own thing and raising their own money and putting an awful lot of time and effort, very much like what the Celtic Junction people are here doing, and in lots of other places across the US. And you know, and again, eventually they prove the worth of this, and quite often later on, again, the wheels turn. And so for example, now we have this umbrella organization, Gaeltacht, and quite a lot, it's great, quite a lot of state support for Irish medium education. And I think around 8% of students who go to school in the south do their education, their primary education for sure, through the medium of Irish. And in Northern Ireland, I think it's about 35 schools operating as Irish medium schools. So it's really good. Níoscoil na Seolta, the bottom picture, is a really interesting example, again, on the cross-community side, from the East Belfast side, from people of often a unionist background, sending their kids to learn through the medium of Irish as well. And that didn't happen without some pushback, and there's a lot of credit should go to the people who were involved in that and who persevered with it. Another area, and in a past life I was very familiar with this, well, in a present life too, but I still do a little bit work in this area, but the Irish language online. So, you know, again, an area where I think we're spoilt in Irish is what we have in terms of language technology, what we have in terms of the resources that are available, the dictionaries, the folklore.ie, the Changlin, the Cherma.ie, things like Aber, the speech synthesis. Up in the top right, you have Bio, which Oideas Gael managed for 13 years. It was... or 14 years, I think. It was not only the first online Irish language magazine, it was one of the first online magazines in Ireland, produced in Ireland, full stop. It started just at the end of the year 2000. And what is common to a lot of these is that you have some really great individuals, again, that ground up effort, and in technology, it's often come from people outside of Ireland. So a little bit, well, from where I'm standing, a little bit up the road here in St. Louis, or maybe not up the road, Kevin Scannell, a computer scientist, mathematician there, has made a huge contribution to a lot of these projects. And also a guy called Michal Machura, originally from the Czech Republic, came to Ireland and lent a lot of his skills and helped make a lot of these things happen. And there's been great initiatives in Trinity, in Dublin City University with Filter and Scoil na Gaeilge, and UCC, the Royal Irish Academy, to make these things available. And a lot of minority languages do not have these tools. So we've been really interested. And again, some people led the way. And I have to say the government really recognised the value of this, and we have a digital strategy for Irish now, and it's a lot of investment has been made in it, and people use these tools, and I have worked and do work on some of these tools, and like some of them you could at times I feel like going like literally every person in Ireland has used this at one point or another, so it's great. And of course I don't want to leave out the fact that there are lots of other approaches too. And there are things that have no state. The pop-up Gaeltacht, which some of you might be familiar with, these events that have been organised, they set out that it had no funding, no state involvement, open source idea, anyone can do it anywhere, it's really simple. And those things are really important as well. You have private businesses, I picked Put a Cafe in Connemara, you have like the Borrow Business Network. Everything is important, and that's what I like to stress. If you're talking about language revitalization, you need a range of responses. You need the state to do its part, you need individuals to do their part, you need social enterprises, you need private businesses, you need, really to get anywhere you need anything. And I think this is the last part, so I'm keeping an eye on the clock, but this is the last section of what I want to do here. But again, I'm going back, you always have to play to your strengths. And I think a great, and I don't know, is it by accident or design, but a strength we have, a quality we have in the Irish language is that it's an inclusive language. And I always tell people, you have to look at it as a key to something, not as a barrier to something. Sometimes people look at having to learn the language as something they have to do a thing, but it's something that lets you access this really rich culture, one of the richest literatures in Europe, one of the oldest written vernacular in Europe, and has a huge modern music, language, cinema, all of this as well, and the language lets you access it, and that it helps to integrate people, and a lot of people move to Ireland, come to Ireland, or are living abroad, and by learning the language, they really feel that they're part of the culture, and they're right to. There's a lot of Irish people who haven't achieved that, and it's has this really positive aspect. And again, I always stress that it predates any political or religious divisions in Ireland. It really should belong to anyone who wants to be part from it. And we were talking a little bit before the recording started, but it's something that has become a facet of the experience in Ireland in recent times as well, is that we have a lot of people who've come to us from Ukraine because of the terrible war that's going on there, and they're learning Irish. A lot of the children in the primary schools, in the kindergarten and elementary schools, it's helping to make them part of the culture too. So that's really good, and that's something we've seen in Oideas Gael. That's something I can see around me here in Celtic Junction. The interest, how it helps connect people who are part of the Irish diaspora and people who have no connection to Ireland at all. And they're equally welcome. And you have these Irish language weekends. Patrick referred earlier to the one coming up here in St. Paul, and I highly recommend anyone who can to go. I'm going along to one in Milwaukee at the end of this week. There are ones all over the US. There are some in Canada. There are in different places all over the world. And we see it in Oideas Gael, I mentioned earlier, about 40% of the people come to us come from outside, and people find different ways into the language, music, the folklore, things like that. But it enriches us. And I want to stress that, and that's why. And looking at the films that take these influences from different styles and different genres, and Colleen Kuhn is, in fact, the script is based on an English language book by a lady called Claire Keegan, a book called Foster, and it's a great example of how they take it and they shifted the context a little bit. It was set in Wexford, they moved it to the Gaeltacht in Waterford, and they made it. If you didn't know that fact, you would never think it was a translation. But these things can be integrated into the language, and all it does is help enrich. And again, it has that effect of encouraging people who might have a passive knowledge of Irish, who might be Irish people who are reluctant to speak the language. There's been a lot of coverage of Paul Mescal, of Normal People, if you watch that show, speaking Irish on the red carpet on the BAFTAs recently. And people take a bit of courage from that as well, to Crogacht, and that helps too. So I think I had two things I wanted to say at the end. One is, Arcigi and Colleen Kewen. Go see him, Colleen Kewen. I'll see if I can pop this link in the chat later. I took it from Irish Central, but it's being shown all over the US. And right there, third from the bottom, you see it being shown in Minneapolis on the 10th of March, if I'm right. So just coming up around St. Patrick's Day. So it's being shown all over. And if you do get a chance to go see it in the cinema, absolutely do. But also, just going back to, what I've been talking about here, I just think there's this pattern that you see, these common traits in things that have worked in terms of the Irish language. That there's multiple ways of doing things, and you need it both bottom up and top down. You need people leading the charge, and there's a wider impact when you get that state support. You need to put time into it. You need to be confident in valuing your heritage. And inclusive of all those that are interested. And talking earlier about, other minority languages and the case of other languages here in the state, I'm sure there's lots of evidence of that too, but I think that's something we always have to learn from each other as well. And just to say, while I was on my travels yesterday, something you occasionally get in Donegal is the Aurora Borealis, but apparently never as spectacular as it was last night. So you're looking there at the view I see often enough in Glencallan, but we had the Northern Lights last night apparently, and Fikra Mangan there, a local photographer, took a great picture. So I felt that was worth putting in. But gur mila maigah carja as Eishtachlum and Mata Ein Kesh again. If anybody's any questions or queries, I'll do my best to answer them now. So gur maigah.
Gur mahagat Rónán Harbar. Well done. So we have one question.
Very practical question.
And I can throw questions at you as well if you want. But okay, so question is, where do people stay when they come to your classes at Glencallan for a week? And anybody else, please put in questions if you want. We still have a few minutes. Go ahead, Rónán.
Sure. Well, yeah. So there's two options basically. So people might want to stay with a host family in B&B accommodation, and that option is there. Or people might want to not stay with the family. We have self-catering accommodation, so houses of various types, and all the details are there on the website, oidesgasgael.ie. But generally you will share with other people on the course, maybe 2 or 3 people who are taking the course as well. And especially if you're coming on your own, which I would say most people do, or maybe it's them and their partner or something like that, it's a really nice way to get to know the other people on the course, and people make great friends while they're here, which is it's important.
Very good. Can you talk about the particular quality of Glencallan? It's associated with the famous Irish saint, St. Columba, or Columkill in the Irish context, and there's kind of this magical valley almost of ancient portal tombs and court tombs, and this sort of ancient energy. It's just quite an extraordinary place to visit, just in itself. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, it's and of course I grew up there initially, and when you grow up in a place, you don't appreciate that side of it at all. And I left and I came back, and I really see it now. But yeah, there is a 16th century manuscript talking about Glencallan, and they called it Glan na Lach Neve, the Glen of the or Glach na Lach Nifa, we'd say, the Glen of the Holy Stones. But a lot of them were pre-Christian, as Patrick mentioned. There is a huge range of archaeology going back 5,000 years, Neolithic times, and that gives it a certain flavor. But obviously the folklore anyway maintains that Columkill, who is one of the 3 patron saints of Ireland, spent a 2-year spell in Glencallan while he was on his travels, and certainly his followers did, and they left this huge They left this huge heritage after them in terms of the tourists, this pilgrimage, which you're talking about, the Gaeltacht and unbroken things. As far as we know, for time immemorial, people have walked this pilgrimage in Glencallan, particularly on the 9th of June in memory of the saint. And as part of that, there's all this early Christian art. And that gives a certain, these standing stones of this early Christian art, and that gives a certain flavor, I think, to the valley, and inspired a lot of other things that came right along. So even in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was this initiative we had to promote tapestry weaving in Glencallan. And if you see the artworks that were produced, they were very heavily influenced by that. So there's that. There's also, if you're not into the history inside all of that, it's a good fun. It's a nice place to visit. The people, I think, I'm not biased, but we're pretty nice, I think. And And we like to see people coming, and you have this really rich music, particularly fiddle music. I talked to a lot of box players here earlier, and they're welcome too, but it's real fiddle country. And if you come for the fiddle week, you'll see 100 people with playing music sometimes in the pubs, and it can be pretty intense. But there's musicians are always welcome, and in the summer you get a really nice atmosphere. So yeah, it's a nice place. I recommend visiting it for a chance. By the way, I want to point out, I meant to say earlier, Arish the Wormalu praising you. It's brilliant to see all the people learning Irish here with our friends, partnered with our friends in Gaelin and all of us Irish language organisations. And we always work together. We like to see people learning the language, and it really helps. And I know last year we had people who came to courses with Gaelin and who came to Tory or Glencolmkill as well. And it's nice to see those kind of inter-Gaeltacht connections happening too. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, actually, in your presentation, our teacher from Montreal, Dean, was in your pop-up Gaeltacht photograph.
There you go.
There you go, small world. I'll have to slag him about that when I see him.
Patrick, we've got a short time, and we've got 3 more questions up. So from Lynn Haggerty, Rónán, if you would, do you have a favorite of the Irish language films you've listed?
Yeah, good one. I would have to say on Colin Kuhn. I know it seems like the getaway, but it is just such a good film, and it's got light and dark. I think Ghaeltacht is brilliant, but it's kind of a historical drama that takes a few cues from horror films, so not everyone's cup of tea. But on Colin Kuhn, I just like all the shades it has. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Well, I want to, before we go to the next question, I've looked it up here. The Quiet Girl is at the Minneapolis Theater, the Main. It's March 10th at noon. So if anybody, I think I'll probably be heading over there at noon. I'll look into group ticketing options. So I'll put that into, we always send a little copy of the seminar when we're finished, so you could share it with friends, or you could take a look back at it. If I can get a group ticket, I'll put that in that email as well as a resource. So maybe we could do that and have a big party at the Celtic Junction, all going over together. We have another one from Martin Goff. If you're a beginner and learning Irish with a Galway dialect, how does that work at your schools? Great question.
It is a great question, and it works is the short answer. So we've always, and it's from my boss Liam that I took this policy. Liam always said, get good teachers, don't worry about their dialect. And I mean, we have teachers from Donegal for sure, but we have teachers from Dublin, Cork, Canada. I have one teacher, he's Irish, but he's living in Italy at the minute, and he's doing some of our online classes. And I think of Megan Hawhian from Saskatchewan, who teaches with us as well. Colleen O'Flynn from Long Island, but they're all brilliant teachers. And when people come, we just say, don't worry about. You do not need to worry about the dialect. It's important to learn other dialects. You want to understand more than 1/3 of the people that speak Irish. And after a day or two, people ease into it and it works.
Okay, from Pat Reisinger, would you talk about the impact that North American language studies, for example, from North America, are having on the push to increase Irish language use?
Yeah, it is having an effect in lots of ways, probably in more ways than I could even think of now. Like there's the fact of people coming, and it basically what I talked about earlier, how that helps people, value their own language and see that. But there's all sorts of other side effects as well that are really interesting. So I was looking around the library earlier, and I was finding about things that I didn't know about, that so many things went from Ireland in terms of music and song and people and knowledge, went to North America, and maybe we're lost in Ireland and still exist here. It's like the manuscripts that went to Europe in the Middle Ages, that happened too. And a lot of that is returned back. A friend of mine in Galway, Deirdre Ní Cníle, has done a lot of work with this around Philadelphia and things, and reclaiming songs. So there's that side. The Fulbright program has been brilliant, and also ICUF in Canada as well, in creating these exchanges. And a lot of I was one of them, and I got to come over here and I learned an awful lot. I got to teach some people some Irish. I learned a lot while I was here, and I took that back to Ireland, and the opposite has been happening as well. So yeah, it's a really mutually beneficial kind of thing.
Well, we'd love to share, some of what our library and our librarian have been working on are a bit of research on that and archiving some of the history of Irish people and the Irish language in Minnesota, and some of the things that Brian Miller has worked on independently of being our library director are the lumberjack camps and all of the songs and tunes and beautiful things that came over as part of those. And I think we've got a speaker that's connected with Beaver Island, which was a very unique spot that really kind of held a lot of those traditions. And of course, we've had the lovely Dahi Sproul, for you guys know of Alton, is one of our teachers here of both music and education and language, mythology, God, everything, poetry, etc. And he's really brought some of those original pieces out of the prairies of the Midwest and even back to Ireland, which is exciting. So we have another question here from Jane Kennedy. Could you give some encouragement, please, Rónán, to those of us who are in the beginning stages of learning Irish, finding it a bit difficult, but not one to give up? I know you, Jane. I know you are formidable. It's a difficult language. Rónán, any advice?
Yeah, difficulty in language is always the distance between what you're familiar with already and what you're trying to learn. So yeah, and Irish has the benefit of using the same alphabet, more or less, some exceptions, as English, but the order of those spellings looks very unfamiliar sometimes. But I suppose the first thing is persevere. The earlier stages are the hardest. That's when all the dialects seem really different to each other and you go, oh, there's 3 ways I can ask, how are you? But actually, dialects in Irish compared to other languages, they're not that different. They're quite similar. And the further along you go, the easier that gets. And the 2 real practical tips I give to people, it's the same tip, but 2 versions. You need to find people to practice with. And sometimes there are ways to do that. You can do it through classes and events and look online. There's Gael Skype and there's Twitter and there's all sort of things like that. The other person you can practice with, and I know because I did this myself at one stage when I was trying to improve, is yourself, you know. So if you take a shower in the morning, well, do you know what all those things are called? Test yourself, come out, look them up,
which things are we talking about?
The next day and repeat. But it does, you get there. Yeah, you do. And I know so many people who have gotten there. And I think often of Salvatore Ficera, who came learning from Rome, who came learning in Oideas Gael and now teaches a cookery course there every summer. So, you know.
Brilliant. Well, do you know, maybe that's a really good part. The idea of, getting stuck into something that you really love, whether it's the cooking or just maybe the mythology, and then finding the different pieces. I have to say for myself, it's really the songs that did it, because you can kind of sing along phonetically with some of the songs. So some of the easier ones, Pádraig na Húlagáin does a gorgeous little collection of songs for children. And I think sometimes starting even with songs for children are great. Now, some of them are desperate songs. They don't end happily. They're Irish songs for children, I have to say. But Nora Begg, there's some really good ones. Éanna Chomhairach, Igonte and Claire, you can find some of the repetitive stuff that can really anchor even some of the verb first challenges. And I think maybe getting the head around that tends to make a difference once you get used to that. And you find that maybe, through repetitive things like song or poetry, it might help. That's my little personal bit to throw in. Now, a personal question from Pat Reisinger. Do you attend the Ó Dochartaigh reunions in Donegal?
There's so many of us that I haven't been ever good. When I was there was one in Buncrana when I think I was about 8 years of age, and I think we went to that. But for me, I'm going, it's, it'll be a lot of people I know already at it. But yeah, I should make a better effort, especially in my current age. It's always great to meet.
Pat, I think you got him blushing just a little bit. I see that pink in you, Rónán. Look at him.
The cold weather here in Minnesota.
I know. It's our Minnesota charm. As we come to the end, we have one last comment here from Kate Daly. Grandma, great presentation, and see you in Milwaukee. So thanks with that. Patrick, is there anything else you want to add as we're coming to a close here?
Okay, just anybody, please consider our Gaeltacht na Gaeilge here at Celtic Junction and April 21st through 23rd. We have 5 levels of Irish. Rónán is going on next weekend down to Milwaukee. I know some of our Dalty, some of our students will be down there and they'll say hello to them. So again, thank you, Rónán. Glencullen is one of those incredibly special, wonderful places in Ireland, and Scale is one of the kind of leading organizations promoting the Irish language. So Gura míle maith.
Míle maith go féin, tá sibh iontacha le gur mhaith go.
Thank you so much, everybody. We have a few more people sending their thanks to you, Rónán. If you have any questions, of course, you can find us at CelticJunction.org. Most of the information on all of our classes on the Gaeltacht are on the website, so you can take a look at those. And then, of course, just down at the bottom, you can see you can reach education at CelticJunction.org. That'll get right to Patrick. And you can find me too, Natalie O'Shea. Rónán, it was our absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. Gura míle maith. And good night, everybody. Take care.
Good night.
Slán go fóill.